Welcome to Improvised Lights. We're going to go through some basic lighting concepts here, like hard and soft lights, color temperature, and reflectors, things like that, lighting ratios of improvised lighting. We'll move on to actually the cheaper and playing around and making light fittings and things like that later on. But first, we want to get these things down so you're better at planning, researching, and evaluating and designing how you want to light your particular project. So let's start first on hard and soft lights. So hard or sharp lighting has very strong shadows. The source is always small relative to the object itself. And you're very familiar with this concept because every day you usually see the sun. And what it does, it casts strong shadows and has a bright contrast. So you're quite familiar with that. Another example, extreme one perhaps, is on the moon. There's no atmosphere. It's very hard. It's very sharp and very dramatic. We can use this to our advantage. So if we want to heighten texture, we can rake a light across there. We get dramatic shadows in the actual crevices where the light can't reach because it's going to be raking across, just like the sun. And that can actually emphasize the surface detail for us. We can use that for many scenarios to actually help emphasize the shape or texture of an object. So when we use a bounce light, which is a softer light, it doesn't have that sort of same textural detail that the main light does. It's an interesting little comparison, seeing the dramatic change between a hard light and a soft light on one little object. So you can cause the hard lights to make long shadows. You can do much more dramatic things. It's got lots of little specular highlights there. So let's have a look at a metal object now. So you'll see the hard light causes a thin strip of bright detail, and the specular highlights up in the top corner there. So it's quite dramatic. When you put a softer light on there, you get a much broader strip. It's not as hard as the edge. The specular highlight's a bit more smooched out. If we look at both of them side by side, we can really see that sort of difference. So the shadow you can observe is different. The highlight detail is different. And it's all about the lighting choice. So a soft light on one side, soft light on the other side, you can get the two white strip effect you see quite commonly. You can bling out the shiny things. There's soft light on it. It's a comparison. If you see here, the hard light is actually making a contrast, and it's actually making this little doohickey more dramatic against the background. So they're actually helping define the shape. Now the opposite, of course, of a hard light is a soft light. So they're generally very large things. Think of the lighting conditions of a cloudy day. In this case, we're using it as our main light or character light. So it's the one that does most of the heavy lifting in any sort of lighting rig. So if we see here, the diffuse shadow was soft, whereas this one, which is a semi-hard kind of large, nice, small light, gives a fairly harsh shadow. So there we can see the difference there. So on the left, that's what happens with this light source all by itself. And here's the diffuse one. You can see a rather dramatic shape. The line is gradated on the lighting. The shadow is much, much softer. The overall contrast is sort of reduced. So you can make a diffuser by just a simple white sheet, bouncing a main light off a white wall or a bag or something. So you can just use diffuser material, like a sheet will do, plastics, whatever you use. And so here we're going to introduce reflectors and lighting ratios. So we're going to use this reflector or bounce board and come in and change the side lighting. So we've got light on one side and light on the other side. The ratio of those two is called your lighting ratio. So for 2 to 1, it would be twice the light on one side and one unit of light or half light on the other side. When people are describing their lighting setups or their lighting rigs. So it's a useful thing to know. So you can see when we put this reflector in there, we still have a strip of shadow there because it's not really as efficient. We can never really get a 1-to-1 sort of ratio in there. So here we go. What we're going to do here is to further diffuse it. We can notice a really, really sort of soft shadow there. And what we can do with our bounce boards or our reflectors, we can actually move them around and actually modify how that light is. Reflectors are like a bad second light source. It's very useful. It's not as efficient as another light, but you can actually use it to actually change the ratio and actually change how the light falls onto your object and things like that. There's no difference here between this pipe and someone's face. You're just trying to look for the best look on how you actually want to do it. And the element of play is very important here. So when you put a reflector against, say, a harder light, the effect is far less dramatic. You still have that harder, sharper line there no matter what you do. And building up a character light is there's an element play there. What you got to do is move it around and try to work out what is actually the best angle for you and the work. So what I'm trying to do here is, just trying to find out where it, from this particular perspective, what looks good on it. So in this case, I was moving around this little LED I've got and just trying to figure out how can you make the best possible worlds out of this one light scenario. Once you've got that, you can start adding things. You can change the color temperature like I am here. You can make it brighter, scoop the light in, scoop the light out. It's a lot of element of play here. I play around with this cyclopsing of little footrest from bike. It's what we're trying to do here is work out with a really good place to put the light. And what I'm going to do is move around with the light and just grab some screenshots out of here and try to show you the differences as you should do the raking light and where the direction of the shadow is and how we can actually go from the back to the front, around the sides, and quickly try to work out where's a really good place that we actually want to have on this one thing. So this is my character light moving around, doing a fast forward thing here, me experimenting and going backwards and lighting from the top and the sides and the front. The front has very low contrast. It's not very useful. And whereas we're going to here, when it's on the front, it's got this horrible highlight on it as well around the O. And so we'll work through these single little things of these is just all the only thing that changes of the position of the light. There's always a consequence for everything. I mean, you don't want to spend too much time post stuffing around like this, taking things out or sticking the wood texture back in and things like that. Try to solve those sort of things in your actual lighting. So let's talk about a characteristic of lights. It's the actual color temperature. The easiest way to express it is from warmer to cooler, so 1000 degrees C is like the warm light you get from a candle. And at 10,000 degrees Kelvin, it's that very, very blue light in the shade, or when you're just being lit by skylights, it's just the sky, no sun. It's very, very blue and cool light. Now, you generally don't want to mix your light sources. It's easier to do things like change something to blue, or either do it in post or just gel it. Gelling is the easiest one. The less work in post, the better our lives are for sort of cleaning up mistakes in shooting. The next little experiment we're going to do is how the exposure affects the light. So what I'm going to do here is a simple experiment. I'm just going to walk away from the pipe with the light, and you can see how the darkness and how I can raise and lower the light can actually change. Once again, the rendering of scene. Exposure is a undervalued thing when it comes to lighting and rendering tones. Let's keep it simple and say there's 5 types of light. The easiest one to understand is, of course, is the one you're very familiar with, the natural and ambient lights. So normal sort of daylight, there's long, warm shadows of the late afternoon and things like that. And then that blue hour, it's only the light of the sun bouncing off the sky and everything's blue and twilighty and lovely. So let's talk about the artificial lights here. So you got the hot lights and the incandescent bulbs. Hot elements, very bright, very hot, heat generated, melt your ice cream you're photographing and cook your people with the big bright lights and the big bright studio. So yeah, that's the typical sort of hot lights. Very inefficient, lots of energy for the light output when you compare it with the other next to the fluorescence and the LEDs. So you're very familiar with the fluorescent bulbs. They're used in studios. There are lots of studios transiting out of the fluoro. We've got fluoro lights, but everyone really wants to use the more adaptable, more efficient LEDs. Now, there's one other one. Of course, it's the flashlights. Now, they're very, very high, powerful, very modifiable light sources. These little speed lights are very adaptable things. So if you're just doing still photography, you can also consider them. Speed lights are very useful in many photographic situations. Now, the LEDs, these are very, very efficient. They don't heat up. They're lighter to carry. You can have a whole variety of colors. They can change their color value. You can have ones RGB versions that can change all sorts of colors for you, or warm and cool. And they're very, very adaptable, and they're very common and very, very efficient. So we've got one here that we've been using for most of this lighting exercise. So it's a very, very hard light. It's this little improvised light we have at Bunnings, and it's quite good because it's got 3 color temperatures, 3000, 4000, 500. It's just a down light, and it's got a simple plug on the end of it. Inside of it's got a reflector and a diffuser. You can take those out as well if you want heavier and harder lights, and it's quite easy to adapt because you can get a mix of lighting and things like that. You can change temperature. The angle isn't too hard, isn't too soft. It's very bright for what it is. You're not going to burn yourself with it, and it's quite an easy sort of light for you to use in these sort of situations. A good sort of find. So thanks for watching. That's the end of the basic section. Next time I'll have all the improvised lights and other little fun things you can do to simulate a really big studio with not much money and not much space.